Let us read from verses 1 to 6. Hebrews chapter 3, verses 1 to 6, reading. Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Christ Jesus, who was faithful to him that appointed him, as also Moses was faithful in all his house. For this man was counted worthy of more glory than Moses, inasmuch as he who hath builded the house hath more honor than the house. For every house is builded by some man, but he that built all things is God. And Moses verily was faithful in all his house as a servant, for a testimony of things which were to be spoken after. But Christ as a son over his own house, whose house are we, if we hold fast the confidence and the rejoicing of the hope firm unto the end. May God bless the understanding of his word to our hearts. Now let us not forget, here is the Apostle Paul, right? I believe strongly, and I explained why already. He's the writer of this book, was trying to help the Jews see Christ for who Christ is. Their reverence and their honor towards Moses, well, Moses was due. This gratefulness was due to Moses. Moses was indeed, look at verse 5, and Moses was indeed a faithful servant was faithful in all his house as a servant. So yes, he understood why they would feel this way about Moses. But they have lost the entire plot. All right? Now look at verse 3. The reminder is this: for this man was counted worthy of more glory than Moses. They were giving much glory to Moses, inasmuch as he who hath builded the house hath more honor than the house. Now they were drawn to not only Moses, but they were also just drawn to the house, right? What Moses was doing. And just thinking about Israel, and that is all. And it says, the one who builded the house hath more honor than the house. You are losing focus, right? You need to turn to the builder of Israel, which Moses was serving in the house, all right? God's house. Not the man, neither just the country. And that is the problem with us very often as we live our Christian life. We tend to lose our focus on who we are really, right? Worshipping, serving. It becomes just a focus on activities, on man involved in the activities, ourselves included, right? And we lose the entire reason for which, right, we are living. So that is the background. All right. Now let's answer question number 1 from Hebrews 3 verses 4 to 6. What must be our focus on? What must we focus on when we live for and serve God? Right? And why is this focus on being a servant so important? Let's answer the first part. Right. Look at verses 4 to 6. Now, actually, I would like to include verses 1 as well. Verse 1. Now, wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Christ Jesus. All right, so verse 1, look at that, and then look at verses 4 to 6. And it says, well, for every house is builded by some man. And look at verse 5. Moses was verily faithful in his house as a servant. And then verse 6, for Christ is a son over his house. Now, what do you think are the focus? In verse 1, obviously, holiness. Holiness, look at verse 1. Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling. The reason why we are in this house is because we are partakers of the heavenly calling. We are brought into the house of God, right? Now, these partakers of the heavenly calling, we have ascertained it is salvation. Partakers of salvation, the heavenly calling. Right, the irresistible call for the elect, salvation. And not just that, the heavenly calling now includes holiness. Chapter 3, verse 1. Wherefore, holy brethren. The reason why we are brethren in this house, not just brethren, we are holy brethren, is because we are saved. Set apart after salvation, we are set apart for God. In fact, we are made holy positionally at salvation, at the heavenly calling of salvation. And thereafter, we are to remain. We are to remain as holy people, to grow in our holiness as well. All right, so holy brethren. So the first focus, when we live for God, and as we serve God, here he's talking about Moses who lived to serve God, right? Then like Moses, we are brethren in the same house, which Moses served. So we must also be holy, all right? So holiness is one of the focus. We spend much time studying about this word holy. Holy. God tied it to the priesthood, the repeated mention of the priesthood. Look at chapter 2, verse 17. Christ a merciful and faithful high priest. All right? Then you also look at chapter 3, verse 1. Consider the apostle and high priest. Mention of the high priesthood again and again, and the priesthood. Now here is the reminder of what it means to be holy, the priesthood, where they will set the priest apart, sanctify the priest by pouring oil or water on it, all right, on the priest. There is a significance is making pure, making holy. So holiness tied to the priesthood gives us the clear picture. Set apart first. They kneel before Moses, and Moses will cleanse them ceremonially, all right, being cleansed. And thereafter dedicated to the temple. So before they can start work in the temple, before they can start to serve God, they must be holy, made pure. And then now they are set apart only for God's use. All right, so we studied all that. And I hope you remember that this word is also tied to the word consecrated. Consecration. Set apart, consecrated, dedicated, devoted, holy to God. And the whole idea of this, the final picture. In fact, this word, consecrated, holy, is really also translated as fenced off, right? Some parts is used as a fence. That is the meaning of the word. We are fenced off for God. We remain within this fence. We are cordoned off. We cordon ourselves off, our hearts, our thoughts, our minds, our lives, cordoned off for sacred devotion to God alone, all right? So the focus of our living on earth, as priests on earth, in God's house on earth, all right, is always about holiness, holiness. Now, in fact, the priest, if you turn to Exodus chapter 28, please. Now, I want us to be very clear about this as we live on earth. Holiness is not an option. Holiness is not something that we think, well, is for someone else. Exodus chapter 28. Exodus chapter 28. Now let us read from verses 36 to 38. 36 to 38, Exodus chapter 28, reading. And thou shalt make a plate of pure gold, and grave upon it, like the engravings of a signet, holiness to the Lord. And thou shalt put it on a blue lace, that it may be upon the mitre, upon the forefront, the mitre it shall be. And it shall be upon Aaron's forehead, that Aaron may bear the iniquity of the holy things, and the children of Israel shall hallow in all their holy gifts. And it shall be always upon his forehead, that they may be accepted before the Lord. What is the reminder of this plate where the words holiness to the Lord is engraved? Is found in verse 38, that they may be accepted before the Lord. Christians, our life on earth, in order for it to be acceptable to God. At salvation, Christ did the work. All right? Christ made us acceptable to God through positional sanctification. And thereafter, the reminder constantly when the people see Aaron serving, that plate on his forehead, holiness on the Lord, unto the Lord, they know that as long as they live on earth, everything that they do must be holiness to the Lord. Look at verse 38. Now then, well, Aaron may bear the iniquity of the holy things. There's the reminder, all right, that the priest brings the reconciliation. But not just that, which the children of Israel shall hallow in all their holy gifts. Everything that we bring to God, everything that we do for God, must always be hallowed, right? Must always be set apart, holy for God. So our lives are totally to be holy. Everything that we do must be holy. The holiness to the Lord on the forehead, or is often not just thought of as, well, it's obvious. It is obvious. It will be very obvious. The Christian must realize, as we live on earth and as we serve God in anything, it must be very obvious that holiness rules. But not only that, on the forehead is the reminder to constantly think about this. It must be constantly on our mind. The holy living on earth, Christians. If you have been having the idea that, well, really, this is just pushing it all the time, it's not necessary. Well, tell it to Aaron. Aaron, take that thing off your forehead, Aaron. You know, it's really pushing it too much. Why must you always wear that on your forehead? Why must you make it so obvious, right? Why must you keep reminding us of it by doing that? All right, so I hope that this whole picture of the priesthood, which is reminded a few times here, this holiness tied to the high priesthood of Christ, the faithful priest, all right, is something that we will keep thinking about. Now then, the other thing that we must constantly think about is faithfulness, right? Faithfulness. Look at chapter 2, verse 17. Now this high priest, which was holy, was a faithful high priest. Faithful high priest. Then look at chapter 3. Look at verse 2. Who was faithful to him, who appointed him. Christ showed the example, as also Moses was faithful in all his house. Right? And then, now this constant reminder of faithfulness is in chapter 3, verse 5 as well. And Moses verily was faithful in all his house. Our living on earth must be one that is faithful to God as a priest. Not just holiness unto the Lord, but faithfulness unto the Lord. And in chapter 3, verse 2, chapter 3, verse 1. Now, Christ, the high priest, we are told to consider him. Consider. One of the things we are to consider is found in verse 2, who was faithful. Faithful. One of the things to consider about Moses was also faithfulness. All right? In chapter 3, the faithfulness of Moses and Christ was set forth here for us to remember. Now, then we have to think about this. When a Christian does not want to be holy, right, does not want to be faithful, now he's basically saying, God, you saved me for all these reasons, but actually I don't intend to take it seriously. Now I want you to take note of the word build. Look at chapter 3. Verse 4, for every house is builded by some men, but he that built all things is God. Chapter 3, verse 3, he who hath builded the house. Right? Now the constant reminder of this word building as well must catch our attention. Now this word build is not simply to construct. It includes that, to construct, all right? But it has the idea of equipping the house, furnishing the house, preparing the house for someone to use, right? For to fulfill someone's purpose. So this word build is not just Christ constructed the house, all right, the priesthood, the house of the kingdom of God for us to enter into. Now, Christ did not just construct that, but He equipped it with us. Please remember that. He equipped this house with us. And as we live in this house, we are to be holy and faithful towards Him, the builder. Now, if Christ builded this house at the expense of His own blood, which was emphasized to them in chapter 2, early on in chapter 2, Christ suffered and died that we may be brethren, that we may be then partakers in the house that He built. Now it tells us an important focus as well. Christ built this house intending to equip it with holy and faithful brethren, and we say we don't want to live holy lives, then we are literally shaking our fist at Him. I don't care. If Christ, you purchased me with your blood to make me part of this house, to be holy and faithful to you, I don't really care about that. Now, if Christ built the house with His blood, then holiness, then it cannot be defiled. Holiness must be unto the Lord. It cannot be defiled. I must always remember, if I'm part of this house, I cannot defile this house. If Christ builded this house with His own blood and His broken body, then it cannot be treated lightly, but it must be served faithfully. All right? So it must not be defiled, but it must not be treated lightly. We must have holiness unto the Lord, and we must serve Him faithfully. We must live on earth faithfully for Him. And I hope that you remember the lessons learned about holiness and faithfulness. Now, you cannot separate holiness from faithfulness. You cannot. Because holiness has two parts, right? One is the personal holiness, your life of keeping yourself from sin, right? Personal sanctification. But then what it means is you faithfully obey all of God's commandments. You cannot say, I want to be holy, but I will not take God's commandments seriously and obey it seriously. I will obey it faithfully, all right? You cannot separate them. But remember, that is the other part of holiness, and that is separation from doctrinal errors. Not just personal faithfulness, but purity of doctrines, doctrinal faithfulness as well. You cannot be holy if you do not separate yourself from errors. Biblical separation is simply holiness, not to be tainted doctrinally with errors, not to allow errors to spread, but to arrest it, expose it, have nothing to do with it, not compromise with it. So holiness must include faithfulness to God's word, God's doctrines, all right? Theological doctrines, theological soundness. So do not just think of faithfulness as keeping ourselves from worldliness, carnality, and all sorts of sins. It includes that, but it's just part of that. Why is this important to remember in question 1 as we live on earth? Now, Moses, I'll put it the other way. Keep remembering that when Apostle Paul talked about holiness and faithfulness in chapter 2 and chapter 3, he kept talking about the priesthood. All right? The priesthood. Now, why were the Levites chosen to be priests? Why was the priesthood given to the Levites? Because, of the famous situation. Maybe ask him, Vincent, why? Very good. Right? When the people were worshipping the golden calf, and that is not worshipping another god, right? We must keep remembering that is worshipping Jehovah. But they worship Jehovah in the way they created Jehovah to be, a golden calf. That is syncretic worship, all right? Syncretic worship. Worshipping God, but yet, doctrinally wrong about how they worship God. Theologically wrong, right? And because the Levites, they stood on the other side, they chose to be on the Lord's side. They proved themselves, right? Not just, personal holiness, but they would not allow syncretic worship. In fact, Israel. So they were chosen. So faithfulness and holiness unto the Lord must include ensuring that we biblically separate ourselves, right, from falsehood, errors, doctrinal practices. We must never think that these are optional, and as long as I focus on holiness, that is good enough. Holiness by itself is biblical separation, and doing it faithfully. To be faithful to God. Separating ourselves from personal sins is being faithful to God. Not committing adultery against God. Not committing adultery against God, to be faithful to God, includes no adultery in theology. All right? So once you see that, you begin to understand why Paul said, Moses, verse 5, Moses was verily faithful in all his house as a servant for a testimony of those things which were to be spoken after. Moses was doctrinally sound. The things which were to be spoken, the testimony of those things which were to be spoken after. Not just about personal holiness. Moses took a very clear stand about syncretic worship. Now you cannot say that I have holiness unto the Lord and I'm faithful to Him if you do not have a holy hatred against all this falsehood in the new evangelical movement, ecumenical movement, the World Council of Churches, right? You cannot say that is holiness unto the Lord on my forehead, is unfaithfulness unto the Lord. So, now after speaking about holiness, all right, so I hope that this settles the question about what holiness and faithfulness is as we live on earth, right? No such thing as one or the other. Both are included. The testimony of the Lord we must be faithful to it. So, now that is the first part of the question, all right? So both parts, holiness and faithfulness, that is what we must cling on to. Check our own lives about, right? From now onwards, not feel that being holy in personal sanctification and doctrinal purity is something that, we don't need to be so serious about. We are made part of God's house. We cannot defile God's house. Now then the second part of this question asks, why is the focus on being a servant so important? And the lessons we must remember. So here the emphasis was faithfulness, holiness and faithfulness unto the Lord. But notice what this faithfulness and holiness was also tied to. Verse 17 of chapter 2. Now Christ was a faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. Now Christ was a faithful high priest because he faithfully fulfilled what God wanted him to do, what God the Father gave him to do, the things pertaining to God, all right? What God the Father intended to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. So, this faithfulness is tied to doing what God the Father expects. Now, what about Moses? Look at chapter 3, verse 2. Christ still, all right? Verse 2. Chapter 3, verse 2. Who was faithful to him, again that word, who appointed him, right? Now, when God the Father appointed Christ means Christ was appointed to fulfill certain things, right? Christ was appointed to build the house, to save us, make us brethren, and bring us into this house, right? So his purpose, the reconciliation, specifically, reconcile us to God. God appointed him. Now, again, it's about service. Christ is faithful because of his service. And he separated himself. He made himself holy, pure, to fulfill that. And look at Moses then. Look at verse 5. And Moses verily was faithful. All right, in verse 3 as well, Moses inasmuch. Just mini verse 5. Moses was very faithful. In verse 2, as also Moses was faithful in all his house. Now it keeps linking it to service and the house, service and the house. This is about servanthood. Servanthood, all right? Why is servanthood? Why is focusing on servanthood so important? Why is it so? When he talked about the faithfulness and the holiness of Christ and of Moses, this was specifically focusing on being a servant, all right? Being a servant. Look at verse 5. And Moses verily was faithful in all his house, the house, as a servant. Christ was a servant. Moses followed Christ's example and was very holy and faithful. Okay? So servanthood. Now, why is it so important to focus on that? Why? Now, we want to see a few lessons, all right? Now, firstly, as I've mentioned, all right, this building, if you look at how it's described, in chapter 3, verse 4, for every house is builded by some man, but he that built all things is God. Now, a building is, when someone builds a building, all right, for himself, then he's the owner, right? He's the owner. And we are also reminded, look at chapter 3, verse 3, he who hath builded the house hath more honor than the house. Why do you keep looking at the external Israel, right? And Moses, and that is all. You need to look at the person who built the house for himself. Remember, this word build has the idea of furnishing, equipping for the purpose of someone's use. It was for God himself, for Christ himself, for his use. Now then, what are we to learn in this emphasis? Christ built a house, equipped this house with us as well, to furnish this house with us. And it's for his purpose. He has more glory. It's for him, all right? Now, the first and foremost thing, why must we remember that we are servants is we are in the owner's house. We belong to an owner. We belong to an owner. They began to feel almost like they belonged to Moses. That when Christ came, Christ was usurping that place. We belong to Moses. But now he wants them to know, no, you belong to the owner who built the house in which Moses served. You need to turn your eyes upon the owner who has more glory, more honor. They miss the point. In fact, this idea of ownership is so strong. Look at chapter 3, verse 4. Every house is builded by some men. You say, you know that a house doesn't exist by itself. Someone built the house, and then he owns the house. And the things in the house belongs to him. Ownership. Then he emphasized the ownership further in chapter 3, verse 4. But he that built all things is God. Again, he that built all things is God. Everything in this universe, not just this house that you belong to, but everything in this universe belongs to God. He is the owner of all things. The emphasis here about the building is ownership. He's the creator. He not only owns us, he owns the entire universe. So Christians, we must think when we say we want to be a servant of God, we are simply saying He owns us absolutely. Not just this house, the entire universe. Why does He want to bring in the entire universe? It's to remind us, right? He owns us absolutely. If He owns the entire universe, what are we? This little speck on this little dot in this universe, Earth, on which we live in. He owns us absolutely. He is the creator, He's our creator, then He is owner of all. Right? He has full right and full ownership over our lives. So the first thing when we focus on, or rather we must remind ourselves we are servants in this house, is that of ownership. All right? Ownership. Now Christ purchased us from the slave market in order to reconcile us to God. He rescued us from slavery of sin. That's the whole picture. God rescued Israel from the Egyptian slavery. They understood that. And He used Moses to lead them out. And Paul understands why they feel this way about Moses. But the reminder is, Moses is still a servant of the builder of this house. It's the builder of this house that saved Moses and you all out of Egypt, slavery. Christ purchased you with His own blood in chapter 2 and made you part of this house. It was not Moses. All right? Now we must always look at ourselves when we say, well, we are servants of God, right? We say that very lightly and very quickly. When we say that, we must really understand every aspect of my life is owned by God. My will, I do not have my will. A servant does not have his own will, all right? His will is at the beck and call of the master. He owns me totally, because He purchased me with His own blood. The slaves at that time, they totally understand. And these Jews, as they hear the stories about their forefathers, they understand. They would understand how terrible it is to be under slavery. And the worst kind of slavery was to be under Pharaoh, right? Totally unreasonable. So they were very thankful that Moses led them out of it. But they kept thinking, it's Moses that led them out and built this house. Israel. No, it was God. So every time we think about our salvation, we must think of us as blood-bought people, purchased with blood of God. Now it's a phrase that I cannot get over. Blood-bought children. Blood-bought children. You know what it means? It's just so moving. Blood-bought. You know, one of the things that when I was very, very young, right? I'm not encouraging you to watch movies, but anyway, movies don't have this nowadays. It's always a recurrent theme where the family is in a lot of trouble. And the children, all right, have no food. The children are suffering and doomed to die. And then the head of the home has no job. And there's the only way to save their children. He will go and sell blood, right? He will go to some place and sell blood. And then he will do it every day, right? Till the family notices that the father is very pale, very weak. And he keeps saying, it's nothing wrong with me. But the only thing he had was his blood to sell, his life. I remember when I was young, and it seems to be a repeating theme, right, in all these shows, I would always cry at that part, you know. Someone uses his own blood, right, to save another. What kind of love and devotion? To be purchased by blood is something that must move our hearts. We are purchased by the blood of God. And then to see another person, this person is purchased by the blood of God. It is very scary to stumble a person. Blood-bought children. Right? So here in chapter 2, verse 17, the reconciliation is nothing less than through the blood, the broken body and the shed blood of Christ, all right? Even in chapter 2, the emphasis of his sufferings were there, all right? So all this must make us think we are not just servants, we are blood-bought servants of God to make us part of this house. So that's the first one, all right, about why is the focus on being a servant so important? Why are we servants? Because we are blood-bought. That's the first lesson to remember. We are owned by God. Now, but of course, with this very thought, the Christian must not think, I am owned by God, everything, and I belong to Him, as something that is negative, all right? That is how we are groomed to think, that being holy, set apart totally for God, and serving Him only, well, it's such a negative thing. Now, to remember that we are servants. We are not servants of Pharaoh anymore. We are not servants of Satan. We are not servants of the world anymore. We are servants of the God that purchased us with His blood. Now, you know, in those days, servants, they are purchased from the slave market, right? So even at this time, they will understand that concept. They see the wicked slave system. This is not the system, the slavery in the so-called slave idea in the Old Testament is completely different from what these people are facing, right? But they will see the wicked slavery system at a time where masters will go to the market and buy slaves, and then they become servants, all right, in the house. Now, when the servants or the slaves are standing in line, they will look at the masters, and they will see some very rich masters, some not so rich by the way they dress. Then the servants will often hope that they will be purchased by a rich master. Then they will live a better life, right? They will be in a nicer house, probably get better food, and so on. They hope for that. And then they see some purchased by rich masters, and then the masters were very good to them. It was the envy of the heart of many of the slaves. So when they meet in a marketplace, later on they say, oh, you're so lucky, I guess they would say. You're so blessed. You're purchased by such a good master, and he pays such a high price for you. And yet, after paying a high price for you, he treats you so nicely, all right? Normally, when someone pays a high price, they will make sure they want to exact every single dime back. But this master of yours is so kind to you. So wonderful. They envy those people. They say, I would gladly belong to your master. Now, when we think we are servant in God's house, when we think who is the owner of this house, when we think how we became part of the brethren and the servanthood in this house, now we must think in this way. It is not a terrible thing. Oh, he owns me. These slaves, they hope to be owned by such a master. They were envious of those who were owned by such master. Now, think about this. When Christ, what did it cost God? In chapter 3, verse 4, he that built all things, this God who built all things, who does not need us because he built things. But yet, after paying such a high price, he is so kind, so gracious to us, provides for everything for us. Now, Christian, every time you struggle about being a servant of God, we are saved to be servants, right? Why must I be holy? Why must I be faithful? Now think of those servants who do not have such a master. You want to think about your previous life where you served a wicked master, right? The world and Satan. We envy that, like the children of Israel. They wanted to go back to Israel, to Egypt, right? That is how we are. Right, so the second thing, as we focus on being a servant, the second lesson to remember is, well, number one is we are owned. Then number two is, who is our owner? Think about who is our owner as a servant. We must see it as the highest privilege to be owned by this master. So they missed the point, all right? Chapter 3, verse 3. They missed the point. They gave glory to Moses. They gave honor to Moses. They felt such a sense of privilege and honor to belong to Moses, to have been led by Moses, rescued by Moses, so to speak. So he had to remind them, no. Moses didn't build this house. Christ did. You must know. You must know who is the one that has honor and glory, not Moses. They felt very privileged to belong to Moses, all right? You must feel the privilege to belong to the builder of the house. That is what his point is. Christian, do we think in these terms about God? When we say we want to know Christ more, we want to thirst after his power and his glory. This is the Apostle Paul, thirsting to show the power and the glory of Christ to them, and then to make them feel such a privilege to belong, to be owned by, to serve this owner of the house. Look at chapter 3, verse 4. He that built all things. Chapter 3, verse 3. For this man, Christ, was counted worthy of more glory than Moses. Paul was someone who thirsted, like David, after the glory of God. He wants to see more. He wants others to see more. He wants to see more of it so badly in his life that he longed for others to see it. And when he saw that the people saw Moses as more glorious than Christ, it troubled him greatly that the children of this God who built this house, and they don't see him. Now then, in chapter 3, verse 4, he that built all things is God. The power of God as creator, the glory in verse 3, the power in verse 4. These are things that constantly fills Paul's mind. That when he thinks of being a servant in this house together with Moses, he doesn't think of, well, I'm owned by God. What a sad thing. Now I have to serve him as an apostle. No, he saw it as a tremendous privilege, and he tried to get the people to see the honor that was due to Christ. Now, when you are someone who thirsts after the power and the glory of Christ, to see it, you have a thirst for others to see it. And you get very agitated when others do not see it, and when others give that to someone else, to something else. It troubles you, it irritates you. That is why biblical separation, when you see, must be something that is so passionate in your heart. I cannot stand it when people say that Christ did not preserve his word. I just cannot stand it. That is his power. That is his glory. I cannot stand it. When people say that, well, it is fine to compromise, that thought itself fills me with hatred, anger, holy anger. That is how Paul is trying to show them, all right? His heart. You must thirst after this God in this way, not Moses. All right, so the first one is we are owned totally by God. We are owned totally by God. The second reminder is that it is a privilege to be owned by God. Privilege to be owned by God. Now then, the third thing we must remember, all right? Now it goes back to this idea of the word built that was repeatedly emphasized, built. Now we are saved and placed in this house to equip God's house. We are saved to be equipped and be furnished, to be furnishing God's house, all right? So it's a word specifically chose to emphasize that. Not just save to bring you into this house, save for salvation only. No, save to serve the Lord in this house. Equip We are equipment in this house. Hence, the word servant was used. Verse 5, when Moses verily was faithful in all his house as a servant. Moses understood his place in this house. I'm not here to, just tell people what to do. I'm here to serve the living God. And however you treat me, I will still serve the living God. All right? He understood his place. Now, do you see why it is so important to remember that? Someone who says, I'm not interested in serving God, is basically saying, God, although you saved me to be an equipment in the house, please don't touch my life. Please don't touch my will. Please don't touch what I'm doing. If it's going to take me away from serving my own purposes. I don't care if you saved me to furnish your house. Use me as an equipment. I don't care. So when we remember we are servants, now we must know, am I an equipment to God? Has my life been that to God? Right? Now let us not forget. I answer a particular question, all right? I think I'll say it here. The servant must be both holy and faithful, right? The servant must be holy and faithful. Now, if you do not want to be holy and faithful, you cannot say, God doesn't want to make use of me as an equipment. How do I know? The church doesn't use me. Now, if you do not want to live a life of holiness, of repentance, of known sins, if you continue to want to live in frivolity and just, have an outward semblance, if you continue to be disobedient in many things, if you continue to be stumbling, those who are blood-bought servants in God's house, you cannot say, I want to be a servant, but God doesn't want to use me. Now, how do we know that? Turn to Psalm 24. Psalm 24. Psalm 24. Verses 3 to 4. Now let us read Psalm 24, verses 3 to 4 together. Reading. Who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord, or who shall stand in his holy place? He that hath clean hands and a pure heart, who hath not lifted up his soul unto vanity, nor sworn deceitfully. Now here is God making it very clear. Who shall ascend into the holy hill of the Lord? Now this is talking about coming up to the temple, to stand in the presence of God, right? To bring sacrifices, to do something, to serve. Who? And the emphasis is who shall stand in his holy place. Clean hands and pure hearts are the requirements. Now, a half-hearted, disobedient life who just keeps talking about our failures, but not doing anything about it, years after year, year after year, and it's the same old life. You cannot say that I have clean hands and a pure heart. No, you do not want to repent constantly. For years, it is the same struggle, the same sin, the same behaviors, right? Then you say that, I want to be a servant. God says, no, you cannot stand before me. All right, so let's come back to this. Now, so as we realize we are owned, and who is our owner, what a privilege. Then we must remember, as servants, we must make a decision in this house. I am a servant. Then therefore, I must choose to be holy. I must choose to be faithful, both in personal holiness and doctrinal holiness. I must make a choice. How long? How long more, oh friend? Do you want to still love the world, love your sin, live the partial obedience, life of partial obedience, continue to cling on to your ways and all that. How long? Now turn to 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21. 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21, please. All right. 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21. Shall we read together? First Kings chapter 18, verse 21, reading. And Elijah came unto all the people and said, How long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him, Not a word. Now here is Moses, the Moses that they revered, the Moses that they honored. Now, what did Moses once say to the Israelites? Elijah. Now, Elijah was another one that was often set on par, right, and a very high pedestal as Moses as well. They saw all these prophets as of greater honor than the supreme prophet, right? But even Elijah reminded the children of Israel, whose servants are you? You have to decide. Now, Paul has mentioned, right? Paul has mentioned that Christ is the builder of all things. Chapter 3, verse 4, he that built all things is God. Now, he is God. Now, Jews, you have to realize he is God. Now, you have to decide now. Do you want to continue to follow Moses? Or do you want to embrace Christ? Follow Christ? Because some of them were still struggling with following Christ. They wanted to follow Moses still in the ceremonial laws. Now, if God, how long will you halt between two opinions? If the Lord be God. Now, if God is God, dear hearers, how long are you still going to want to live a partial holy life, a partial consecrated life, a partial obedience, partial faithfulness? How long? How long more do you want to continue in such a life? In your family, in your personal walk, when it comes to personal holiness, when it comes to doctrinal holiness? How long? You are a servant in this house. You are an equipment in this house. You are saved to be furnished, to be used of God. How long do you want to halt? Remain useless in this house? How long? How long do you want to continue to fight against Christ and follow Moses? Right? So they had to make that decision. Moses was a servant of Christ. Why don't you be a servant of Christ? But for us, well, we halt between two decisions of self-will and God, right? So that is now then the next thing. So the third one, we have to make a choice, make a decision. But that choice, when I say make a choice, I'm not saying it is optional. But the question is, how long are you going to still delay that choice? You must make that choice. I'm a servant, a holy and a faithful servant. That's what I need to be. I must start. I have to stop halting, stop being held back. And then the next one, we live in this house and everything that we have belongs to its owner, the servant in this house. Moses understood his life belonged to God. Moses understood that everything came from God and everything is for God in that house. No servant would ever dare in their master's house to say, this belongs to me. They are servants, all right? They have nothing that did not come from the master in the first place. Why is it so important that we remind ourselves that we are servants in this house? It's to remind ourselves, really, every breath that we take, even everything that we own, everything that we have, our talents, our abilities, our health, our children, our jobs. Now, everything belongs to God. He gave it, or rather he would say, he furnished our lives with these things, that we may be equipments using what is furnished to fulfill his purposes. All right? Now it comes back to this idea that we can never think that we have our own will. We have our own choices. And this thing belongs to me. My child belongs to me. My choice of job, of what I'll do, what I'll be in this life belongs to me. No, absolutely not. And then the physical things are to be used for God. And God alone. The servant cannot think, I will use this for myself. So that is the next one. Now then, another one is this. Now, Moses was a faithful servant. Christ was a faithful servant. Chapter 2, verse 17, look at it. Pertaining to God. Faithful high priest in things pertaining to God. Christ showed the examples. Anything that God wants, anything that has to do with what he wants, Christ will do. And everything is about what God wants. Moses was the same. Look at verse 5, chapter 3, verse 5. And Moses verily was faithful in all his house, not in some aspect, but every aspect. Every aspect that Christ set up the house for, in every aspect. He was faithful as a servant. Now, so the reminder, the important reason why we must remember we are servants is, now servants wait on everything that the master, all right, decides on. They just wait, and I've mentioned this before. They just wait patiently by the table. They wait patiently outside the door. They wait patiently in a corner in the house and just keep looking at the master. Everything pertaining to the master, they are watching carefully. In all the house, every aspect. They are just watching, what does God want? Everything is about God's things pertaining to God. Not just what he wants, but all his things, in everything that is about him. That is the servant's focus. Always about simply, what does God want me to do next? He does not choose, pick and choose. God, actually, I do not want this will for me in my life. The important thing to remember is, I'm a servant. I just stand in that corner and wait for directions. And while I'm waiting for the master about things pertaining to what he wants, and in everything, I just keep doing what he has asked me to do now. That's all. I don't ask why, when, and all that. I just keep serving as a servant, faithfully, right? Not wondering, not asking, not choosing. When he shows, I just follow, right? That is why Moses was called faithful, right? Faithfully doing. Faithful has the understanding of what is given, we do it exactly to what the master desires. Faithful, all right? Faithful. What he desires, I do it faithfully, consistently, diligently, and exactly accepting what his will is and exactly doing exactly how he wants it to be done. That's all. Now, this is not even to mention, not to bring in the idea that he is the creator. Just the idea that he's creator would already demand that we accord to him, accord to Christ, the creator, this kind of faithfulness. Just everything in this universe is created by you for your purpose, then therefore, everything that you ask, I exist to do it. That is all. Have we started to think of ourselves as that, right? Now then, the second last reason and why we must remember we are servants, and every time we remember we are servants, this must come to our mind. Now, let's turn to Luke chapter 17, verse 7. Luke chapter 17, verse 7. Here is Christ, the builder of the house, explaining his idea of us being servants. Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 17. Now we shall read from verses 7, all right, 7 to 10. Luke chapter 17, verses 7 to 10. All right, Christ explaining the builder of the house, talking about servanthood. Let's read verse 7. But which of you, having a servant plowing or feeding cattle, will say unto him by and by, when he's come from the field, go and sit down to meat, and will not rather say unto him, make ready wherewith I may sup, and gird thyself, and serve me, till I have eaten and drunken, and afterward thou shalt eat and drink? Doth he thank the servant because he did the things that were commanded him? I trow not. So likewise ye, when ye shall have done all those things which are commanded you, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. And that is it. Now here Christ explains, the builder of the house, as I mentioned repeatedly, explain how he thinks and how we should think. Let's say you have a servant plowing in the field. Now remember I said the servant are just faithfully doing what they have been assigned. They don't ask, why must I go plow the field? Why must I feed the cattle? If that is what is given to me, now I just keep doing it. All right? I just keep doing it. Don't keep questioning, when can I do the other thing? Will you let me do the other thing? He won't keep questioning God's will. Whatever he has been asked to be doing, to be at that time, faithfully doing it. So he said, now that is field. The servant faithfully in the field doing that. Now then, eventually he'll come back in, all right? Now he comes back in to do what? To wait on the master. How do we know? Because he says, now which of you, if when you have a servant, you will say, oh, now that you're in, go sit down. No, all right? He will say, would you not rather say, make ready? Now, that is the next thing I want you to do. Cook for me. So go, gird up yourself, and serve me till I've eaten and drunken. Afterward, you shall eat and drink. Now then verse 9, does he think that he thanked the servant? So here is where we learned. What must we remember as a servant? Now we must not think, why is God so ungrateful? Why is God so unthankful? A servant has the idea that it is just my duty to serve. That is all. I do not expect things from my master. The fact that I am his servant, that I am not rotting and dying without food and sleeping in the cold, because he purchased me, because he let me be in this house, come back to this house, that is all. That alone should make me realize I am purchased, saved to do this. Does he thank the servant? So likewise, when you have done all those things, like Moses, done all those things, faithful in all Christ's house, like Christ, faithful in all that the Father, in all pertaining to God, all those things which are commanded. How do you feel now? Then just say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. Now, do not read this as a servant that is very unhappy, did not thank me, a servant that feels that this is a bad master, a servant that's angry at the master. No, we have done that which was our duty. We are unprofitable servants. It's truly from the heart. Truly from the heart. You are the master. You gave us everything. When we went to the field and plow, you provided the equipment. When we fed the cattle, you are the one who provided all these resources that we can sow, we can grow, and we can now feed the cattle. Everything that we are able to do was also from, we are not profitable. Now, how much more when Paul reminds us, he's the creator of all things. You think we can do anything that matters so so wonderfully to God? No, it's simply Him providing all things to us. They say we have done that which was our duty to do. Again, it is not a grudging statement. It's simply, this is what I am to do. Why does anyone even think that I should receive thanks from the Master? Now, we must remember this about our lives. Otherwise, we will feel, why has God chosen this will for my life? Why does God expect me to live like that? Why does God expect me to be fully consecrated to Him? Why? And so on. Well, because we don't view ourselves as servants of the living God. That is the problem. Now, when we begin to realize it is our duty, it is our duty. It is not a duty of grudging performance, but a duty that is performed with much gratefulness and love. With much gratefulness and love. Who is this that built the house and put me in there? The glorious Creator. Now, those servants, as I mentioned earlier on, and I close with this, we actually have one more, but I'll continue next week. The servants, right, they are purchased with this kind of very kind and gracious and wonderful masters, right? When they say it is our duty and we are unprofitable servants, they mean it from the bottom of their hearts. They are so grateful, right? Now, Christians, when God says, be holy, be faithful, you are my servants. Now it must stir us to want to be holy, want to be faithful, because we are so grateful that we can be part of this house and made part of this house. We want Him to use us. Now, next week, God willing, we'll look at then. Now, what do you think? I asked in June, what do you think about someone who says, I do not wish to serve? Let us turn to God in prayer. What do we have here? Top 5 reasons why church dropouts, what church dropouts say, why they stop attending church. Now, please remember 66% of, well, I take the American view, they are the most readily available results. They stop attending church at least a year after turning 18. So from